what we need to consider increasingly now is the actual environmental footprint of digitalization. And this has become increasingly important because of the scale and speed at which digitalization is evolving.
Hello, this is the weekly Tradecast, a podcast brought to you by UNCTAD and Development. I'm Sarah Toms. We're exploring how major events are shaping trade and development and how that affects billions of people around the world. This week, we're looking at the UN's Digital Economy report that's just been released. Across the globe, greater access to technology has revolutionised the way we live and work. While the changes are delivering many benefits, the new report says how we manage the digital transformation will have a major influence on the future of humanity and the health of our planet. With technology and digitalisation evolving quickly, the environmental footprint is also growing, from the rising demand for minerals, water and energy to the creation of more pollution and waste. For many developing countries, they are seeing only limited benefits from the digital economy, but are highly exposed to the environmental impact. To help maximise the positive aspects of digitalisation and minimise the negative effects, the report says we need new business models, policies and strategies. Well, joining me now to see what can be done is Torbjörn Fredriksson, head of the e-commerce and digital economy branch. Torbjörn says he's convinced digitalisation is key to achieve sustainable development. But his secret's out because he confesses he's not a fan of social media platforms himself. Well, Torbjörn, welcome back. What are the main concerns with digital technology and the environment that have come to light in the report?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me again. It's great to be back. What we have done in the past, when we have considered the interface between digitalization and the environment, is to look at how digital can offer solutions. And there's no doubt that by applying digital technologies, we can perhaps reduce the energy use by making things more efficient. We can go to teleworking to avoid transportation. We can go into e-commerce to avoid traveling by car to shop and so on and so forth. But what we need to consider increasingly now is the actual environmental footprint of digitalization itself along the whole life cycle of this production, use, and end of life. And this has become increasingly important because of the scale and speed at which digitalization is evolving. As we go for a digital transformation in the world, this is going in parallel with the need for us to go into a low-carbon economy, and the issues are intertwined. For instance, the kind of minerals that we need to enable the low-carbon transition are very much the same that we need to undertake the digital transition, so it adds additional pressure on raw materials.
Well, that's the crux, isn't it? What can we do about it, especially as technology advances and we need more and more of these resources and use more and more energy?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and this is what we're looking at in the report, and there are no easy answers. Let's be clear on that. Let me just illustrate with a few examples of what we are seeing in terms of the environmental footprint first on the report. I think one of the most surprising things to us is that when we really dug into this area of work, we haven't really studied it in depth before. So it's a new knowledge that we are generating for ourselves so that we can be better at advising governments and understanding what policy options that are available. And what is striking is how little we know in the world about the environmental footprint of digitalization. There is a huge lack of data to really illustrate the magnitude of the phenomenon. For example, based on various studies, we estimate that the ICT sector, which is of course the part of the economy that produces digital goods and services, accounts for somewhere between 1.5 and 3.2% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We don't know more precisely. We can see that, for instance, making one computer that weighs about 2 kilos involves the extraction of about 800 kilos of raw materials because you need to extract all the specific minerals that are needed to produce the computer, and there are many different types of minerals there. We can see electricity use by data centers it's something that we haven't paid much attention to until very recently. It's expected to more than double from now to 2026, only 4 years. And partly due to cryptocurrency mining and artificial intelligence, which are also relatively new phenomena. So what we know from the data that we have been able to capture until a few years ago, they may not be very representative of what we will see in the coming 10, 20 years, because the nature of digitalization keeps changing. Another area when it comes to environmental impact is the growing use of water. This is a big challenge, especially in parts of the world with water distress. We can also see important impacts on waste generation. The more things we use, the more waste we create. So there is a whole range of issues that we need to look at in a holistic way to see how best to reduce the potential negative environmental impacts from digitalization.
Interesting observations that you've made from the report. What would you say are the most shocking aspects? Do you think people would be surprised to know, for instance, that their phones and social media habits have such a huge environmental footprint?
What may be surprising is the overall impact. It's difficult to address the behavior of people, because when I use my mobile phone or my computer and so on, that in itself may not have a major impact on the environment. But when billions of people are doing it, it scales up. So in order to address the issues here, you need to find collective action opportunities. And these are not always easy to come to an agreement on. Plus, that the situation of people and businesses and countries are very different depending on where you are, because we know that there are still huge digital divides in the world. So whereas people in the most advanced economies are using a lot of new gadgets, replacing their smartphones, replacing their computers, the situation in many of the poorer countries of the world is very different. So we have much fewer digital devices, for instance, in the poorer countries. We have much less use of e-commerce. We have much less use of 5G mobile broadband, etc. So we're dealing with different levels of digitalization. And while some countries still need to digitalize much more in order to function well in the global economy and society, we have some questions whether the level of digitalization and consumption in the area of digital world is really compatible with the efforts in the world to reduce the environmental footprint. There's very little discussion about the environmental implications in the digital strategies. So really, from the start, we need to bring these two dimensions together.
Right, from the ground up.
From the ground up, and that will then also impact on what we will recommend in terms of standards for businesses. We need to think from the very outset of how we design the various devices so that they are produced in such a way that they can also be recycled. This is not always possible today.
You mentioned developing countries. How can developing countries harness the benefits of digitalization that they need for development without suffering from the negative impacts?
Yeah, so this goes back to this issue that countries at different levels of development are very unevenly affected by the environmental impacts related to the various stages of digitalization. For example, many developing countries are key providers or key sources of the raw materials that are needed to produce the various digital devices and infrastructure that we need to operate the digital economy. Some of them are also big recipients of digitalization-related waste, often being sent from more advanced economies for treatment. And at the same time, developing countries are often at the tail end of global trade, where the opportunities for value addition and economic growth are quite limited. Still today, this is an issue that we have been talking a lot about in UNCTAD over the past 60 years, is how can the commodity-dependent countries, developing countries, get more out of the resources that they are harboring? How can they use these resources better for diversification, for adding value, and for exporting more than just the raw materials. This is going to be very important also in the case of the minerals and metals that are linked to digitalization. And for that, we will need both improved strategies at the country level, but also global rules that really take into account the development opportunities for developing countries, not just thinking about the security of the users of the metals and minerals that are being extracted from the ground. With the global environmental challenges, be it in regard to climate change, the biodiversity, water shortages, etc., etc., there is a necessity for the world to come together to look at every opportunity to address those challenges and think about how digital can contribute to solving those challenges, while at the same time think about when we use digital technologies, how can we use them in a way that is as environmentally sustainable as possible. We need to come together from all the various stakeholders that can contribute to this development, from the private sector, from governments, from international organizations, from the research and academia community, and from the consumer and civil society perspective, because there is no other way. This is a very global industry. The digital economy is very much led by a small number of very, very large firms. The big digital platforms, the big producers of digital devices and infrastructure, these companies will have to assume a particular responsibility because what they do really has global impacts. But that also means that governments need to think about how they can encourage or perhaps require these businesses also to change their behavior with a view to securing the environmental sustainability.
Well, thank you very much. That was UN Trade and Development's Torbjörn Fredriksson, who was this week's guest. Tune into the weekly Tradecast next week and every week for more insights on the most pressing issues around the world of trade and development. And there's even more on our website, UNCTAD.org. I'm Sarah Toms in Geneva. Goodbye for now.